I have the pleasure of moderating today's discussion, which is securing America's infrastructure against foreign threats. I appreciate, as always, everyone taking and investing time with us. I know how invaluable that is, and we'll be sure to make the most of it. For those of you that may be new to ICIT, ICIT is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to securing, modernizing, and making resilient critical infrastructure that provides for people's foundational needs. So when the US government looks at critical infrastructure, they do it as critical to national security. When ICIT looks at critical infrastructure, we look at it as critical to human beings. Those Venn diagrams overlap tremendously, as we're about to see in today's discussion. None of the work that ICIT does would be possible without the tremendous support of our sponsors and partners, one of which we're lucky to be joined by today, Jacobs and John Karabias. Today's event is part of an ongoing series of briefings with the executive branch, members of Congress, cybersecurity experts, with a focus of this session on how we collectively can protect the United States from foreign threats, particularly those posed by the Chinese Communist Party, while strengthening the systems our country depends on. We're honored to be joined by some incredible voices for this discussion. Congressman Gabe Amo, representing Rhode Island's 1st Congressional District, as he is the vice-ranking member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. Congressman Amo brings deep insight into U.S. strategic engagement in regions like East Asia and the Pacific, areas central to today's national security discussion. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Congressman Amo holds a seat once occupied by someone who has long been a guiding light, a personal mentor to me, and just one of the legends in the cybersecurity space, Congressman Jim Langevin. His legacy continues to shape the dialogue that we have on policy, innovation, and the role of public service in the technology and cybersecurity space. We're also joined today with John Karabias. John is the Senior Vice President of Cybersecurity at Jacobs. John's perspective from the private sector is critical as we talk about aligning policy with real-world operational cybersecurity. I'll be moderating, and with that, Congressman Amo, I'll turn it over to you, sir, for some opening remarks.
Well, it's an honor to be on with everyone. Corey, thank you for yours and ICIT's leadership in assembling this series of conversations at a timely moment for the protection of our nation's critical infrastructure. I certainly want to add my acknowledgement as well of one of my congressional predecessors from the 2nd Congressional District of Rhode Island, Jim Langevin, who has carved out a key role here, helping to drive forth an agenda that created things like the Office of the National Cyber Director, really ironing out some of the infrastructure in the bureaucracy that is necessary to combat the challenges that we face. And as you said, I serve now as the vice-ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I serve on 2 subcommittees that handle many international cybersecurity issues. Europe, where I actually just left a few minutes ago, talking about NATO and our partnerships to ward off that dastardly alliance of China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia, and on the subcommittee of East Asia and the Pacific. And so you may not have expected me to necessarily talk about the Europe subcommittee, but this Congress, in our organizational chart and division of labor, the Europe subcommittee has jurisdiction over the State Department's Bureau of Cyber, Space, and Digital Policy. Many of you know that as CDP. And just several weeks ago in April, our subcommittee held a hearing on the future of cyber diplomacy and the CDP. And for those not familiar with CDP, it was created in 2022 to serve as like a coordinating hub, right, of the various elements of cyberspace, digital tech and technologies, and then the global digital governance and cyber diplomacy. Right? The mission of CDP is to ensure an open and reliable internet. As you know, that's not a given in many parts of the world. And that open, secure, that reliability of the internet is a necessity to promote democratic values like privacy, freedom of expression, and access to information. And now CDP, as it's constructed, also coordinates with the Department of Defense, with DHS, Homeland Security, and the IC, the intelligence community, to ensure that we have comprehensive and efficient policies to both combat and deter adversaries alongside our allies, allies who have some questions these days about how this collaboration amongst nations will move forward. And unfortunately, if you see the plan that Secretary Rubio's put out, both in draft form and as they've socialized it with us here in Congress to reorganize the State Department, it would break up CDP and that work. And it would undermine, frankly, the core reason CDP was created by separating its economic functions and its cybersecurity functions. This split would create overlapping and redundant mandates. It would jeopardize CDP's work and all the agencies that work alongside CDP. So here's an example. CISA, as you all know, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, relies on CDP to manage programs that provide training and resources to protect targeted countries from cyber threats. And CISA is already facing dramatic cuts to their existing programs and staff because of Trump and all of the DOGE activities. Ending that coordination with CDP would serve as an undermining function to CISA's work to keep Americans safe, right? And so as the House Foreign Affairs Committee works on a plan to reauthorize the State Department, I'm working really closely with my colleagues to make sure they understand the need to centralize, right, and have great clarity of focus around CDP's work. But, I will say quite frankly that I'm worried about House Foreign Affairs Committee chairs Mass and the Republican majority's desire to, follow the lead of Secretary Rubio and split up CDP. I don't think that would be strong. I know that my Democratic colleagues, led by Ranking Member Meeks, and then certainly on that Europe subcommittee, Ranking Member Bill Keating, understand the dangers of the Republican plans for cybersecurity and CDP. We got to support CDP's critical work to ensure they have enough staff and a mandate to go forward. And what some of my colleagues do understand, though, in contrast, is a threat to our cybersecurity and infrastructure from the ambitions of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, right? On the other subcommittee I serve on, and pardon the noise, on Capitol Hill, they play bells to make us get to the right place. But on that other subcommittee I serve on, the East Asia and Pacific subcommittee, we often discuss the threat raised by China. China is expanding its influence in the Indo-Pacific through the Belt and Road Initiative that you all should know about, and other associated economic strategies. I find them coercive. But, when you look at the CCP, they are rapidly accelerating their efforts in cyberspace, including their hacking program, right? In 2023, FBI Director Christopher Wray raised alarms that the CCP's hacking program was larger than all other major nations combined, right? A state strategy to disrupt and cause chaos through hacking. And we know that they use that hacking program, right, to do things that put us at just extreme risk, right? Critical infrastructure, ports, factories, the grid. And that's just, a short list. We have had to have our guard up against these threats. Now, China is not only focused on the United States, and that's what's important. That's where my foreign affairs lens comes forth. In the last week alone, the Czech government condemned China for cyber security attacks on the foreign ministry. And Google released a warning on how Chinese hackers basically hid malware in Google Calendar events. Think about that. We're all dependent on our Google calendars. Think about it. They hid malware in those calendar events to target governments and organizations. That's serious stuff. So we have to protect our own infrastructure and work to protect our allies and vice versa. We've had programs like the Cyberspace and Digital Connectivity Fund that were supporting our allies. But here again, the chaos and confusion of the last few months rears its ugly head again, because the foreign aid freeze caused things like the Cyberspace and Digital Connectivity Fund to not be operational. So we have to restart these programs to better protect our allies and our own infrastructure from cyber threats. We are mutually beneficiaries of this work. And, as China and those that dastardly alliance that I referenced, North Korea, Russia, and Iran. So I know I went on long, but I wanted to set the landscape from where I see it on the Foreign Affairs Committee, where we can exploit and identify opportunities for collaboration. And so I look forward to discussion. I have the honor of turning it over to a great leader, the SVP of Cybersecurity at Jacobs, John Karabias, to share some remarks on the work that he and Jacobs are taking up in the Pacific. So John, over to you.
Congressman, thank you, and thank you for your table setting remarks and for your work on the various committees. So I want to begin by thanking ICIT, Corey Parham, and the team behind this for inviting and having Jacobs. And I'd like to use my time with this group today by providing a window into U.S. critical infrastructure, both through the lens of design and engineering and the attendant cybersecurity from here at Jacobs. And I'll focus my remarks on the particular threats to various types of infrastructure coming from the PRC and recent work that we're doing in the U.S. territory of Guam. So to set the table, Jacobs is the world's leading builder of infrastructure, as well as a scientific-based consulting and professional services firm. We have a large digital and cybersecurity business where we bring digital and industrial cybersecurity to our large global client base. Put simply, we build the world's most iconic buildings and work on projects that span three relevant areas: water environment, life sciences and advanced manufacturing, and what we call critical infrastructure, which includes energy and power, transportation, and cities and places. And each of these areas has critical infrastructure vulnerable to the PRC. So starting with water, where our One Water approach to optimizing the complete water life cycle gives us a unique vantage point into the security of water facilities. We've conducted over 30 cyber assessments at U.S. water utilities back in 2024. We're doing more in 2025, and are the market leader in water sector OT security. From the PRC, we've seen intrusions into water facilities in Hawaii and other large metropolitan water utilities in the continental U.S. that are strategically linked to large populations and or are located near strategic national assets like military bases. In our life sciences and advanced facilities business, we're building the world's most advanced fab for GLP-1 drug makers, electric vehicle factories, and U.S. semiconductor production centers. Notably, during the COVID pandemic, we identified cyber espionage taking place from APT 41 and APT 27 among PRC-linked groups attempting to exfiltrate R&D and trade secrets from vaccine and biotech firms that we work with. We've also seen intrusions into semiconductor clients in the US, where IP, design schematics, and fabrication process data was stolen. And now to Guam, where Jacobs is the leading US engineering and cybersecurity consulting firm on the island, and notably where I recently traveled for a full week to meet with several Guam government leaders. Guam is one of the US's 16 strategic seaports. Beginning with DoD, we are currently part of a joint venture with Black & Veatch to provide engineering services for the Missile Defense Agency as part of the Guam defense system that is being built there, a vital link in our Indo-Pacific defense strategy. We are building nearly 70 facilities at Marine Corps Base Camp Blaz and have delivered major projects at Andersen Air Force Base. The criticality of energy and network communications to these facilities is vital to power projection from Guam and makes them obvious targets to the PRC. We've been part of working groups between DoD and civil infrastructure entities like Guam Power to ensure that US DoD bases are resilient in the face of that threat. And then quickly moving from DoD to the civilian side, we're actively working with Guam Water, Guam Power, and the Guam Broadband Office, from the implementation of new control systems in water across the island to helping deploy an island-wide broadband network that is secure to threats like Salt Typhoon. We're at the tip of the spear, building and ensuring standards-based cybersecurity in those major infrastructure sectors within Guam. And now a couple of closing remarks here. A few comments on the PRC and other national security threats that we've cataloged at Jacobs. Corey, this is not just about the kind of living off the land pre-positioning that's been widely reported with the PRC. We've seen the theft of industrial control sensitive information, HMI screenshots, engineering design documentation, and other forms of IP theft from the PRC. These are very sophisticated threat actors with strategic targets in mind. Whether it's human manipulation, i.e. spear phishing, exploiting 0 days, or whether it's penetrating vulnerable networks and devices like firewalls and routers to gain access and then disguise themselves within the networks using native operating system tooling. We've seen that diversity of tactics from the PRC. And we need asset owners to be focused on cybersecurity, and particularly OT cybersecurity, where there has been less investment than in enterprise IT. Strong security that functions as a deterrent is possible, regardless of your utility size or budget. We've got excellent control standards from NIST to ISA 62443, just to name a few. And we are increasingly recommending methodologies like the Idaho National Lab's consequence-driven cyber-informed engineering methodology that focuses on no-fail operations within critical infrastructure entities and then works backwards to identify and disrupt the adversary's attack path. But Corey, we're behind as a nation in this area. I want to be really candid and offer this up as a wake-up call if we are to deter adversaries like the PRC in the cyber domain. I want to leave you with one personal thing that I spent some time closing this with, and it's sort of a prognostication and a vision that I want the audience to have. I believe a scaled cyber attack by an adversary will be part of a major conflict in the years ahead. The unclassified wargaming has shown the domino-like effect of a cyber takedown of key infrastructure assets that disrupt way-of-life operations and then engender widespread panic across populations. History shows us, and I'm a student of history, I've written about this, that emerging and asymmetric forms of warfare have been successfully used to usurp hegemonic powers like the US. And the question for us in the US is, are we up to the challenge of defending our critical infrastructure, which is going to require an all-in approach from US government, from the private sector, and candidly, in the most Jeffersonian way, from an informed and engaged citizenry that demands this from our leaders. So I'll pass it back to you, Corey.
Okay. John, thank you. Congressman, thank you. I want to do a little bit of scene setting for discussion that I'm very excited to have with the both of you. One from, I think, just from a foreign affairs, foreign relations perspective, sitting on the board of directors for our nation, Congressman, as a member of Congress, and you look at this, the United States is the most connected country in the world. That connectivity comes with vast exposure, whether we're withdrawing politically or we're withdrawing, ideologically. the fact that we are so connected is that is a factually accurate statement. We're the most connected country on earth to lots of places outside of the United States. What our geography has protected us from so long is we've tended to have friendly neighbors to the north and south and a very large moat to our east and west. When you look to our west coast, that geography, 51% of the Earth's surface is Indo-Pacom. The furthest western portion of that, of course, where America starts its day, is Guam. Some of the largest economies, the U.S. and China being top among them, massive trade routes, massive supply chain. It's just a logistics challenge, and one that involves a lot of water, a lot of space, a lot of time, a lot of distance. And it's hard to think about projecting power, however, 3,500 miles from them to us, but it's, 98 miles from mainland China across the Strait of Taiwan to Taiwan. And so coming back though to like this conversation, there's a fundamental difference between the way the United States wields cyber as an instrument of national power and the way that China wields cyber as an instrument of national power. We traditionally, think tank, a little bit of a policy wonk, and to put it in the context of diplomacy, information, military, economic, the U.S. thinks about and bends and constrains cyber under a military bucket. So we apply law of armed conflict, LOAC, the international humanitarian law. China, not so much. They keep it more under the informational or the economic. They wield cyber primarily against the United States as an economic instrument of warfare. And if our past is any indication of our future, we should be very concerned about our critical infrastructure right now. Why? So this is the context. President Xi is elected in 2012. 2013, he comes to the U.S. around about that time, enters an agreement with President Obama, agrees to stop commercializing stolen IP. They do that for the most part for some time period. Trump 1 comes in, implements a round of tariffs, gloves come back off, they're full-throated back at it with stealing and commercializing stolen IP from the United States of America. Now, smash cut Trump 2, we've declared economic warfare on China, and we know there are campaigns like Vol Typhoon, Sol Typhoon, the whole Typhoon series, that they have placement and access in our critical infrastructure. They wield cyber as an instrument of economic warfare, and we have declared economic war on China. We have done that, and we have simultaneously started cutting some of our cyber defenses, and that leaves us exposed. And so it's a very real conversation that there's a political piece and there's just a very real technical piece, because the critical infrastructure owners and operators, many of which are on the call with us today, are going to have to deal with the reality that China is going to be targeting their systems. And in that context, maybe first to the congressman and then to you, John, of what can our communities do collectively to support the advocating for a robust cyber defense capability within the federal government, and then what can we do to ensure they have the coordinating capability to minimize the risk from China? And then John, from the OT community, from the infrastructure owners and operators, what can we do? Because I agree with you, John. We're behind the Powerball in that geopolitical context. Like, we need to be ready for this. What can we do to get ready? So, Congressman, over to you.
Well, look, I think it's essential here that there's an empowered set of actors beyond the federal landscape. I think state governments play a key role here, given that they're squeezed in the middle, especially as we see a range of inconsistencies around policies, funding, etc. I mean, my state was unfortunately the victim of a significant hacking scheme. It sort of hasn't been clearly identified as a state actor behind it, but the point here is the vulnerabilities exist everywhere. To John's sort of clarion call around having an informed and active citizenry, that's best reflected in the states, in state governments, to really have a demand signal projected to the federal government for support, but not just waiting and sitting on their hands. This is going to be an increasingly significant line item in state budgets. And starting to plant the seeds for that moving forward is incredibly important. But then deploying, because at every state there's some capacity in the private sector, but thinking more strategically about how to engage in a cross-sector approach in the preparation, because I again, in this sort of unstable moment, especially in the backdrop of the economic warfare that's taking place with regard to tariffs, there's more and an increasing likelihood of China, of the PRC flexing its muscle in other ways. And right as this sort of situation plays out in both in the economic sense, but elsewhere, and so that is going to, I believe, cause more vulnerabilities to be exploited, and there is no good step forward for us collectively that includes sitting still. We have to see at every single level that type of engagement and projecting that we are going to be focused on planning moving forward.
John, thoughts?
Yeah, so I think it's important maybe to distinguish threat actor types just quickly, because it gets to what's the appropriate response. So we've talked about PRC. We're seeing, in general, more sophisticated attacks from PRC. So they're not simply taking advantage of, internet connected industrial control systems. They've actually designed attacks, to penetrate, traditionally operated network defenses, for example, and once getting in, then doing the things I described earlier. The Russians, who have been really active and quite frankly, who we've learned a lot from the conflict in Ukraine from, you've got both Russia aligned and then what we call sort of loosely Russian aligned actors there, who are responsible for a lot of the water activity in the United States, where they were kind of, pinging for, internet connected SCADA devices, getting access, and then moving into those systems. So, some basic hygiene would have stopped a lot of that Russian affiliated threat that we were seeing at water. And then there's ransomware, a real increase over the last 2 years in OT for ransomware. And I think threat actors have learned that if I can take down a water utility, operational downtime really hurts. And so it's become a big target. So what are we doing to prevent that kind of threat? So and that's, cyber criminal gangs, not necessarily geopolitical actors. So I mentioned internet connected devices. CISA has done a great job with basic cyber hygiene. And I think, hey, having appropriate MFA, one, making sure that you've got appropriate password protocols. What we saw was a lot of HMIs and other control systems were going to the field, potentially with default passwords, allowing threat actors to get in. We've got to have password hygiene. And then making sure that those internet connected industrial control systems are off the internet. Basic building blocks, that is an important start. Then there is, Corey, for asset owners, we really leverage the SANS 5 ICS controls, things like, do you have an incident response plan? Do you have appropriate secure remote access? Do you have a defensible architecture? Using that as a North Star to maturity and just getting started is, I think, priority number one. As I mentioned, from a small, low funded utility, they can get started in a risk focused way. Let's look at our basic controls. Let's use something as the SANS as a North Star to the more mature utilities that are doing more sophisticated defense work. Every asset owner has a role in this. And it's about understanding where you are and figuring out how to get to the place you need to be.
John, thank you. We're coming up on time. That flew by pretty quickly. And I'm going to turn it over to each of you for just some quick opening remarks or some closing remarks rather. But as I do that, I would love to just, this has been an important conversation. It's vital. It's one that we've been having for years, to be honest. And the awareness is present. And I think now it's time for action. And we need to, there's that age-old saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. You want to go far, go together. We need to go both fast and far, unfortunately. And so I think, it's very important that as we think about whether it's cyber, whether it's national security, to get the results that we're talking about, we're going to have to come together. We're going to have to work together from various communities, from the political down to the technical and implementing solutions. And as we do that, you are both tremendous leaders on respective sides of this. And I would love to just get, what are the things that, those listening in, those of us that are dedicated to this space that we can do to help build consensus to move together to bring solution sets here. So Congressman, maybe first to you and then John to you.
Well, Corey, you stole my line. I use that proverb all the time, so I'm gonna tax you for that. But in all seriousness, look, I'm gonna end with three big things that I want everybody to dig into, and I'd love to continue to engage with this group collectively. One is the role of alliances, and I do believe that the United States cannot stand alone in this moment. We are going to have to be closer and closer to our allies as the threat matrix evolves. The types of attacks, state and non-state emerge, and that we are able to rely on the collective strengths that we have, and that's not just limited to nations, but also to the cross-sector types of relationships that are necessary. The second, and that I'd put in the go fast category. That we have to reaffirm. In the go far category, I would speak to an element that we didn't really get to touch today, but is the human capital around this work. We have to empower the technologists, the leaders of the future who are going to be working on this across our cyber, across our artificial intelligence, across our compelling capacities to respond to this. That's one of the ways that we are very, very, very far behind in terms of producing the talent that is going to be working in this space to respond. I have spent some time in Congress trying to build from the K-12 educational aspect to create a pathway into jobs in this space. And then the third thing that I would say that is in both the fast and FAR categories, and that's about a mission alignment and vision. I believe that in some ways that isn't something that we need to wait for. That we need to dissect and break apart what the functions that everybody has are and how we execute. I spoke a bit about what we're doing in response to a reorganization at the State Department. That's one aspect, but everybody has a role, and making it very clear what tasks everybody's taking up. That's how you go both far and fast. A division of labor that's in accordance with the challenges that we will see. And so to all of you, I say thank you for engaging. But the reward for good work is more work. So if you're doing good, keep going, but you got more to do. Thank you.
Eloquently described, Congressman, and let me build on a couple of those points quickly to close. Look, critical infrastructure security is a nonpartisan issue. I know that from Secretary Hegseth to incoming Assistant Director Sean Planky to the state and local leaders, everybody recognizes that this is a challenge. And my hope is that we don't let perfect be the enemy of the good as we work on policy in this area moving forward. Some specific areas as it pertains to Jacobs that I think are relevant to close. The Congressman mentioned alliances. I'd have a slight turn on that to say our industrial cyber community, we've got a really special one that is working on community best practices. And so how does every owner operator who's just getting started or a leader in this make sure that you're sharing that best practice with leaders? That's how we get that real world experience out into the field. And then one final thing that's also important from our vantage point here at Jacobs is this concept of secure by design. How do we ensure that the buildings and products and infrastructure we're getting out into the field is better built with security in mind so that we are, quote, baking that in instead of bolting it on in the end? I think, continued work on that, and we're putting a lot of time and effort to it here at Jacobs, is going to be time well spent as we move forward as well. Corey.
John, Congressman Amo, thank you both for joining us. Everyone out there, thank you for spending and investing your time with us. A lot of work to be done, and we'll be doing it together. Thank you so much. Everyone have a great day.